All right. Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Kumar Pushpak, and I head the team here at Jonas Services. And I'm having Tim Jerome with me, right from Albuquerque, which is a city in New Mexico. A very warm and good morning to you, Tim. How you doing?
Good day. I hope you're doing well. It's a wonderful day here, starting off on a very exciting week, and very excited to talk to you today.
Wonderful. Yeah, and so do I. All right, what we gonna talk in now?
So,
We
so
have discussed on the project management. Sorry, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead, Tim.
you actually talked about something, and you led in last Monday. You asked a really interesting question, and it sparked my interest. Is education priceless? And how can we put a price on education? And I went back to my books. Um, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that first, if you can. Can you put a financial number on the value um, of education?
That's a good question, Tim. To me, there should not be a number. I mean, who can give a number to a good and rightful education? I don't have a number, to be very frank. I don't understand how people actually arrive on a number when it comes to an education, and that's what I wanted to talk to you and I wanted you to give your thoughts in. How can and when actually, okay, not how, but when did education started having numbers in terms of right? We were studying in, we learned in a good education need to be taught, and it need to be taught in a rightful manner, which should uh, give enough information and enough knowledge to an individual so that he or she starts adding value to the society. But yeah, over the period, I think the things changed, and the education started having a price, and that's where things started deviating. So I wanted to talk to you on this, and that's the reason the last week we I actually had an open question to you. Can education be priceless? I mean, the other way around is, it's too expensive. It can be too expensive, so it's a priceless kind of stuff. But yeah, what's your thought, Tim? Uh, you asked me a question. I don't have a number, and I don't want to give out a number, Tim. But yeah, if I have to ask you, what's your thought on education? How do you see the education piece out there?
So I'm going to make a statement first, and then I'm going to actually give you my perspective on how education become part of our culture and society. Right? Culture, the unwritten laws and rules that we follow that define our group, and society, which is the greater group in that supports the way we don't just survive, but we progress. First of all, you could do a benefits to cost analysis, but the problem is you're looking at a benefit to cost analysis of society. Let me give you an example. There are two parts of education that every society, every culture has to have. Number one, language. Language as well as some type of written evidence that we can pass down to the future. So we have some type of alphabet and some type of lineage to structure the writing, such as that people who didn't talk to me understand my thoughts. Now, there's also the accounting part, the math part, the science part. And as long as we've had things like granaries and metal and other things that we can trade and buy, we need math and accounting. And so we've always had those as part, but they generally go back into the leadership, right? The royal family, the religious leaders, all of these things who want to maintain these components of society so that society can have, number one, a legacy, right? It continues. Number two, it progresses, it builds on what it has. And so we look at this. Now, what's funny is we can actually point to the Bronze Age, right? We look at Neolithic times, and when we move from iron into bronze, all of a sudden a few things happen. Number one, metal smithing gets real complex because you have to get ore from one continent and you have to get ore from another continent, and you have to trade and you have to share knowledge and education on how to turn these different ores into a really special metal. And you have these skills not just with the metal smithing, but you have the skills with the stonework. So it gets really complicated. And then textiles too. And so we have these stovepipes of knowledge and education that have to be passed down, and they're not going to be passed down word of mouth. A lot of it is. In the early education, a lot of this happens by, I study under somebody for 5 or 10 years. I learn exactly how they do something, and this is how I progress. Now, 1200 BC was a pivot point. That was the end. 1200 to 1100 BC. We don't know. And a lot of the academic references say 1177 was the date that we had the fall of the Bronze Age, right? And we have all these, out of 9 civilizations, 8 collapsed. And what collapsed and what made these civilizations collapsed were about 2 critical components of 9 things that had to be in place, okay? And the 2 critical components were communications and commerce. And both of those we had to have in place, and they had to be supported by some type of education because they were very complex. Now, Egypt was able to survive because it was so big and it had everything it needed inside itself, but it limped through the next 2 millennia. Now, then it gets really interesting because you have Greece. And Greece says, for all of our citizens, we need certain ways to do things. And we have Athens and Sparta having 2 different experiments. And the Peloponnesian War was looking at these different experiments. Now, I'm only talking about Western civilization here. And Sparta had a focus in one type of education, and Athens had another focus in their type of education. And Athens primarily worked a little better, and it worked well enough that when Rome came up, which was the next empirical power to have massive influence over Western civilization, it adopted primarily the education system of Athens. And you take your children and you raise them, and you have all of these liberal arts, not just these mechanical math and science, but you have, how do I think? What's right and wrong? It's not just a religious discussion, it's a philosophical discussion. You have the quantification and the measuring of science. You have all of these things going on, and you don't just do it in one place. You do it as a child, you do it as a young person, and then you do it as an adult as well. And it's funny because even in Rome, just like a lot of people now go to a university in their home country and then they go to like England, to Oxford or something, this is how education was working back about 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. You'd still go back to Greece and work with the real masters for your polish as you were going into this. Now, so we have this understanding of what education is and its value, and to be a great leader in Rome. I'm talking about Republic Rome as well as Empirical Rome. It was recognized and it was almost required for you to be very polished. I'm talking about debate. being able to
Mhm.
argue in public and influence people through your arguments, not just saying that person's a bad person, don't listen to them. And they were saying, this is the strength of my argument. And because of the strength of the argument, it's better. And you also have oratory, which is the ability to stand in public and in front of thousands of people be able to defend your ideas and your power and authority, which is very, very influential. And you had to have this if you were a leader in the military as well as a leader in government. And we're not even getting into religion yet, but
Mhm.
we're still having education that carries on this kernel of wisdom that says this is our society, this is our culture, we move forward. Now, primarily, it's for the citizens, right? The citizens is part of the citizens of Athens, the citizens of Rome. And primarily it's men. And primarily
Mhm.
it's the leaders. And so you have the support of a critical few that are really getting this. Now, in the 13th and 14th centuries, something very fascinating happened in Western Europe called the Black Plague. And it
Mhm.
wiped out such a huge population of Western civilization that the very economic structure of society could not sustain itself. So we
Is
up
that
to then
sorry,
go.
sorry to interrupt. Was that the first pandemic recorded?
No. During the Peloponnesian Wars,
Mhm.
2,500 years ago, you have two great plagues.
Mhm.
One of my favorite plagues, if you want to say favorite plagues to talk about, is during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. And
Mhm.
boy, when was he? He was like what was it, 150 A.D. And he 19 years of his reign. He was one of the last really truly great emperors of Rome, and
Mhm.
the last 19 years of his reign, number one, he was fighting two wars in Italy against really big, the Roman Empire, two really big enemies, and he had a plague which was hugely more devastating than what we're experiencing, and he had to rein in and control society under both those heavy burdens, and he did it he did it really really well, but it wasn't the first plague. This is and what we're going through, and like I say, this is what humans do, we hunker down on a regular basis about every century. We stay in our
Mhm.
homes, we protect our towns, and then when things settle down and we figure out how to manage the environment and how to manage our health, we start recovering from this. But these plagues were so bad, and the Black Death was so bad that
Mhm.
we basically had to use the immunity of the survivors to rebuild society. We are much luckier today to be working
Mhm.
with what we're doing now. The complexity of our education infrastructure and our research is such that we can do this on multiple continents with multiple societies with multiple languages and cultures, which is brilliant. Yeah. Now,
Right.
so you have the Black Death that wipes out everybody. Now, up to then, you'd have something called the serf. A serf was
Mhm.
somebody who worked on your property and did your work, and you made sure they're all right. They're one step above a slave. And we couldn't have that anymore. There wasn't enough humans on the planet to support this type of economic structure. So we have the end of serfdom, and then we have an economic leveling. And this is where education really takes off. And this is where we learned what we're doing now. Now, we had a couple extra things here in the 14th century. We have the understanding of guilds, okay? As towns and
Mhm.
villages grew, their power and influence was, how can I trade with other cities and other nations? And so they wanted to protect their knowledge, like working with metals, working with stone, working with textiles, working with foods. And they had basically communities of experts, and they called these guilds. We have
Hmm.
guilds now in our society. I belong to one. It's called the Project Management Institute. It
Hmm.
basically protects and promotes the progress and the development of my profession, right? it's
So
it's
guilds are basically, yeah, sorry, guilds are basically the institutions, right, who started promoting the education and henceforth.
well, you have it actually is happening twofold. You still have what
Mhm.
we understand as today as formal education, because back in Greece, the guilds were growing up. They weren't established yet per se. You still had these communities of experts in the different areas of commerce and the different areas of knowledge, but they weren't fully integrated into the university experience. Back in Greece, you have more of the, more of the liberal arts and the general science and math. And inside the guilds, you have your focused area. And the integration of the guild into education actually continued. We have this. Again, we have this today too, right? We have our technical schools, and we also have our schools of higher education. And what happened is, as we progress further and further down this path, our lower education actually prepares us for either going into higher education or a technical path, or it helps us go directly right into labor. And that's what we have at the end of the 19th and 18th century. You still have the influence of the guilds, like Benjamin Franklin, right? He was actually had a contract when he was a young child, and one of his family members put him under a printer to study under them for 7 years for free, and then eventually become an expert and become a professional printer. And
Mhm.
again, with these specific skills, you still have that structure. But our education finally became the conglomerate it is today, with the integration of all of these concepts into a public venue. Now, there's some interesting experiments that are going on along the way. You have early adoption of a more democratic approach to government, like in Amsterdam in the 16 and 1700s. And around the 16 and 1700s, Amsterdam was having what? A literacy rate of 98% of their society, which is goofy,
Wow.
compared
Mhm.
to 10 to 25 to 30% of the rest of the world. And you just cannot compete with that when you are comparing the impact and influences of societies. um,
Mhm.
America, the fascinating thing about the United States in the early 1800s, in the mid 1800s, was if you're from Europe, you walk into a saloon or a bar in the US, like in Boston or Philadelphia, and you have people off the farm or off the ranch or out of the woods who are debating and having very deep, masterful, logical discussions with people who
Mhm.
were in the legislature. And this is what democracy had brought. And this is what the great experiment was. Can we actually create an environment such that this sharing, this flat sharing of knowledge and experience? Now, we're still in the
Mhm.
middle of that experiment right now.
True.
What? Go
Somebody
ahead.
actually questioned me. Sorry, Tim. Somebody actually questioned me just why are we discussing history? All right.
This is
Yeah.
important. This is because we have to know and understand why we have this structure of education first, because of the next topic. And do you want to introduce the next topic?
Absolutely, absolutely. Also, just to add into what Tim said, the reason today we are discussing this because we are discussing on education. Anything, not anything but education, how it started and where we are today, and what's the future looks like for education. So that's the topic that me and Tim are discussing. Also, people who doesn't know about Tim is a writer. He's an author. He is in the middle of writing his book. He has written a lot of case studies. He is also doing his thesis, uh, and all this information what Tim is talking about, I'm sure you're going to add into your book when it's going to release. All these information, all these theses you're going to add into your book. I'm glad that you're sharing it. But let me ask you this question, Tim. When you actually think the education was available for a greater population, when it actually got started getting structured?
What we know is being able to have access to knowledge for the common, quote unquote, the broader community was in the 18th century, the 17th century, and the Great Experiment. We really didn't have access, and it continued to grow. The United States, in its wisdom
Mhm.
and its structure, actually supported the ability, and it demonstrated what happens when you give education and knowledge out to everyone. This is what's fascinating. Now, we have to remember that when I talk about knowledge and skills, and that's primarily what education was, knowledge and skills, giving people knowledge, right? This is how we actually moved forward, and these institutions of giving people knowledge, these schools, universities,
Mhm.
actually become centers and hubs for creating new knowledge too. It originally started with the royalty and with the higher level of religious leaders too, and they said, "Here's the direction knowledge is going." And all of a sudden, it moves out to a more flat, more democratic approach, where we're able to think beyond the boundaries of what religion says and beyond the boundaries of what a certain leader says. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about education for, a certain direction that our country has to go. It's education for all, and it frightens a lot of people today even to actually consider these things. But that's what.
Right. Yeah,
And
you saying something?
yeah, and let me finish this out real quickly. The
Uh-huh.
19th century, the 1800s, with the whole automation of industry and commerce, said we have to have a better way of preparing people to live in this, because we're automating things and we're getting rid of jobs, and we're having problems with alcoholism and use of drugs because people are out of work. This is not a new problem. This is something that happened in the 17 and 1800s with textiles, especially in England, and they used the restructuring of education to prepare people. Now, in the 19th century, we talk about something called progressive education, which means I need to prepare not just me, not just you, but our society for,
Mhm.
how are we going to move forward? How are we going to progress as a group? And that's what the real interesting thing was. Progressive education was looking at, what do I need to be? What do I need to do? Where do we need to go? Instead of skills and knowledge, instead of textbooks, all of a sudden you're moving from you know, back from rote memorization, right? You stand up
Mhm.
in front of the class and repeat something. You're actually hands on and you're working. So you have the reintroduction of this guild idea and this
Okay.
reintroduction of the participative part. Montessori schools in the 20th century were actually an example of this progressive education. You don't learn particularly through doing exercises in a book. You learn through how you work as a group, you work with people, and do that. And in order to do that, you have to teach your kids. All of a sudden, education is, how do I get along with people? How do I
Mhm.
actually step back and I acquire knowledge? How do we make decisions? How do we argue? And this became almost more important than the content that we were studying. And this is where we are today. We're in the middle of, progressive education, where our primary focus is, how do I learn? And how do we prepare our individuals to learn? This is
Mhm.
where it's getting interesting. Now, the problem is today we're still teaching knowledge and skills. Epictetus, 2,500 years ago, one of my mentors said, you guys are coming to me and you're asking me what to do. No, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you how to think. And
Mhm.
again, he was saying this 2,500 years ago, and it's still a problem today. The classes I teach in project management, it's like, tell me what to memorize, Tim. Tell me what I need to know to pass this exam. And the problem is, both the skills of management and leadership and the knowledge it takes, you can't really learn it through memorization. Now, memorization is good, but memorization is twofold. Number one, I can recognize it. And for my skill set, you can actually learn or recognize project management within 35 hours. To actually comprehend or use that knowledge, it takes about 4 to 8 weeks, an hour a day, just like brushing your teeth or doing exercise. And you cannot get away from this.
Can I add something, Tim, here?
Uh-huh.
Uh, you mentioned about memorization and the learning. I don't think these two go well together because when I memorize, I tend not to understand, but I memorize simply. Unless and until I understand, I cannot learn. Am I making sense?
Oh, total sense. There's three parts of learning, and we can see this. There's a great book by Robert Greene that I'm reading
Mhm.
called Mastery. And Robert actually references the same people I do, the Stoics, Epictetus, Seneca, Aurelius, and then some other non-Stoic philosophers, Aristotle and others. Now, these guys say there's three parts, and I'm going to put it in Robert's words, okay? Number
Mhm.
one, the way you learn is learn how to recognize things first, right? And we think of that as learning, but it's not. It's basically front loading this part of your brain, and it's your short term memory. That's great. Now, what you're going to have to do is what Robert calls apprenticeship, and which I've called practice. Well, repetition. Let's call it repetition right now.
Mhm.
It's basically the exercise of that knowledge and learning how to use it. Okay, and then that actually turns that knowledge into your limbic part of your brain. It becomes your muscle memory. Okay. And that's
Mhm.
what we understand as comprehension. All of a sudden, it becomes a natural part of our behavior, but that takes time and practice, right? And then on top of that mastery, once you have your mastery, and that could take up to 5 or 6 years, your mastery, then you can actually refine that and you can build out this knowledge repository and contribute to knowledge and the education. We see this in martial arts too. How long does it
Mhm.
take to get a black belt? 5 to 6 years, right? And you don't
Right.
do it through a lecture series. Of course, your teacher's going to have to help you recognize, what's right and what's wrong. But then most of the time you're spent, on the floor, wrestling and working and learning how it feels. And this is the influence of progressive education, to understand this.
Right, right. Uh, we talked about the past, and you also discussed on the current stage. Would you like to highlight the key differentiators uh, in the current education system versus the earlier in the 18th century when actually this education was getting structured? Do you see what differences that you see?
Complexity.
Uh-huh.
Fundamentally,
Is
yeah,
it more complex now, or was it earlier there?
more complex now. Think about this. We were building a civilization of knowledge and education for the last 2,000 years, right? We're building the edifice, we're building the infrastructure, we're building the building. Now we're learning how to live it, and we're learning how to use it. And so in a great way, for the last 2 millennia, we've been
Mhm.
through this introductory component. And now we're in the apprenticeship of how do we use this education. And that's the great pivot point we are in our society right now. Now, we think we're in a crisis of pandemic, of political, of all these things. These things are symptoms of where we are in our society's maturity. We're in a great pivot point. And when we come to times of great stress, which means famine and drought and disease like COVID, we're saying, oh boy, these are horrible times. Well, it's horrible because number one, we're at a pivot point and this is occurring at the same time. And I don't want to stress too much on this, but this pivot point is a transition due to the complexity we have in our society, the acquisition of technology that continues to take away people's jobs, the
Mhm.
acquisition of the ability to actually not just hold knowledge, but easily communicate it. Because a lot of this knowledge in history, and this is the other difference that you were asking about, Kumar. The other difference was we're talking about tacit knowledge, and that's what a guild does. I can't really describe it to you. Just if you follow my actions and you repeat my actions, you'll be able to do it too, and you'll get a hang of it. That's passing on what we call tacit knowledge. What we have today is explicit knowledge, the ability to explicitly communicate our our knowledge and our education. We have codified ways of structuring knowledge that we can hand over, and we don't have to have somebody standing over us and saying, this is the way to do it, just follow my lead. That's the big thing. And I noticed Kumar has just disappeared. um, I want to actually address the big question, okay? And um, the question is, why are we even talking about this? That's the big question we're discussing. Here it comes. Okay. So our problem today is sort of COVID, but COVID is really only part of the issue. The bigger part of the issue is that many of us, even with or without COVID, may or may not be prepared for the next 40 years. And that's the major concern that we're looking at. Educators, leaders are saying, can we compete? Can we remain relevant? And every person in the workforce was faced with this earlier in the year, and we're going to be continuing to face with this in the next year and a half. Do I remain relevant? And that's what the major issue is. Can I learn more? Can I get knowledge more? And people like Peter Drucker and Deming were saying that's not the approach we need. We need a different approach to education. And that's what we're here to talk about today. What does that approach look like? A big part of this approach has to do with, oh, there you are.
Sorry, Tim. It was a system issue.
Oh,
System.
no problem, no
Yeah.
problem. So
Hope
the
you
only
continue. Yeah.
to catch you up really quickly,
Mhm.
there are two things that are occurring now, right? We have these
Mhm.
immediate stressors on our society, and it's not just COVID. Okay,
Mhm.
politics are changing. Um, Commerce, how we exchange things, is changing. Everything is changing, and in the middle of this, every individual is saying to themselves, can I learn more knowledge to stay relevant? Can I actually have an impact? Can I have some type of control over my destiny? We're asking this at the national level. We're asking this in our group level. We're asking this in our entire society. How do we actually, create a legacy? Can we survive? We're back to 1200 BC. What happens if our society starts failing? And these are scary thoughts. Now, there are people who actually started talking about this in the 1960s and 1970s. I'm going to focus on just one, but there's a lot of research that was done here. Out of progressive education, they learned some things. Just like we talked about Epictetus, we're going to have to stop thinking about learning and education as the acquisition of knowledge. We're going to have to learn about education as a lifelong process because things are going to change quickly. If I learn a skill today, that skill may not be around tomorrow. And even if I learn a skill for 3 years from now, in 3 years, maybe that skill is irrelevant. And we have to think about it in a different way. So we have to prepare our people and prepare ourselves and think about education in this type of an accelerated mode, which means we're going to give everybody a more flat understanding of not just here's the knowledge, but here's how to think, here's how to approach. And we're actually saying, here's the keys to the kingdom, guys. Whoever figures this out first. And here's what Peter Drucker said, what we need to do. And this is at the individual level. He said we have to work from being skill people to be knowledge people, from skill-based labor, from, I do Excel sheets, or I'm finance, or I'm engineering. What they have to think of is I'm learning on my feet. What worked yesterday does not necessarily work today.
Mhm.
And I have to know my knowledge base. I have to know how to work with people. I have to know how to acquire knowledge quickly and integrate it quickly and be able to influence the world around me. And so he said, these are the things you need to think about. Number one, who am I? How do I work? And what are my strengths? You have to learn how to learn. You have to learn how to learn quickly because this is what you're going to be applying to everything. It's not just going to school. It's going to work. It's being at home. The phone you're going to have in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years is not the phone you have today. And we have to accept this. The computers you have today are out of date. And the computers you're going to have in 5 years are going to be totally different. Telecommunication, Zoom, all of these tools are going to be gone. What you have to learn is how to be able to adapt and be able to work with this. Second thing you're going to have to learn, okay? And this is something that has to be part of our education. It's something we have to teach our children and teach ourselves and teach the people around us. Where do I belong? Who is my group? Maslow talks about fulfillment of needs. And one of the needs we have is, who is my group? Who do I belong to? Am I part of an engineering group? Am I part of my admin group? Am I part of a project management group? Is this the people that I actually gravitate towards? Because there is too much information out there, and we're going to have to work together as groups. And this is not me talking. This is Peter Drucker who was saying this. We have to work as groups to actually acquire knowledge and create new ways of taking advantage of this. And it can't be just ad hoc. Isn't it interesting that all of society gravitated so quickly to Zoom when COVID happened? Nobody told each other, did we? It was just sort of like a tacit adoption. We can't have that. What we need is some way that we do this consciously. And that's what Peter Drucker said. Whatever works best, let's share it as quickly as possible. Number 3, what is my contribution? How am I helping progress? Now, this is scary because this is the way I make my money. This is the way I differentiate myself, and this is the way I compete. And we're going to have to get away from competition. This is no longer a win-lose games, everyone. We're talking about we're not talking about survival either. We're going to survive, and that's not a question. But if we expect to go to Mars, if we expect to get out of the solar system and explore the galaxy, we're going to have to work together. And we have to figure that out. And we have to figure out not just what my skills are and what are my abilities, but how do my abilities fit into the big picture? You know, again, you plan. If you consciously plan your life out 50 years, you'll be relatively successful. If a corporation plans their progress for the next century, they'll be relatively successful. A society has to plan for thousands of years now. We don't do this. And if we don't plan, society's going to go in a different direction. And we have to have some way to do this. And we have to do this together. Now,
Tim, sorry, just to cut you in, uh, you picked up a right sentence. You said something somewhere in the between. Learn how to learn. Let's spend a couple of minutes on this. This caught my attention. Learn how to learn. It's a good word, but do you think the society or an individual has done enough on this learn to learn stuff?
we teach our
How do
children
you see
this.
that?
We teach our children from kindergarten through leaving traditional school, right? We teach our children this. And then when we go to trade schools, we teach our children that. And when we go to universities, we teach each other this. And still, I have about 300 new students that are between the age of 30 and 45 or 50. And I'm still teaching this. We're still back to Epictetus 2,500 years ago, right? They're coming to me and saying, I want knowledge. And I'm saying, I'm going to teach you how to learn. I'm going to teach you how to think. And we still don't have this. Now, they had that back then. They understand, they had an inkling. What we have today is an opportunity to build that out. We actually understand this, and you see this. It's out there already. Like Robert Greene, Ryan Holiday, Simon Sinek, and all of these people are saying the same things. We have to have a conscious, disciplined approach to acquiring knowledge and integrating it into our lives to fulfill what we think is good and right for us personally. And we have to connect to society in such a way. We have to. It's not like we can do this on our own. We have to. This is part of our hardwiring. We have to connect to other people to actually figure out and say, hey, you have a better way of doing this. We have to put our pride aside. We have to be humble in doing this. We cannot do this with ego. And they were saying that back 2,500 years ago too. This is a humbling experience too. And we do have a certain sense of pride when we acquire knowledge. So it's a delicate balancing act. And I think, based on my experience, 6 or 7,000 people, um, it's not something that is, number one, easily done. Number two, it's not something that is actively communicated. And so education primarily has to be learning how to learn, and it has to be integrated in with the acquisition of the knowledge itself. It's not there. It's not there. It still draws crowds when I talk about this.
Right. How do you think, Tim? We talked about the past, the current also, you discussed it. But let me ask you a little bit to be futuristic. Now, how do you think the 21st century, the education programs looks like uh, in your thoughts? How do you see that?
Let's take best of breed. Let's be smart about this, and let's take the best examples from all of history that we've talked about. Okay,
Mhm.
thinking and education must be flat, and it must be accessible to everyone. We cannot shut down any ideas. We have to allow people to participate in the acquisition of knowledge. Okay, it's going to
Mhm.
look different. For instance, Stoics, right? Again, I'm gravitating towards Western civilization, and they're not the be all and end all. They're just an example. They come from the word stoa, and stoa means marketplace. And these
Mhm.
guys actually did their education, and they had their thoughtful discussion debate in the marketplace. They were walking around under the tents in the shade, and they were eating fruits and gathering tea and sitting down. This is how they educated. They gathered in the middle of commerce. And so I see education becoming more integrated into everything we do like this. Now, there is going to be some formal structure that has to be in place for the collection and centralization and standardization of knowledge. And so we're going to have focus areas,
Mhm.
STOAs per se, that actually do this. And they had that back then. They had their academies and their academics and their knowledge foci. And we're going to continue that. Now, with the automation, we're going to go away from the acquisition of knowledge, which the systems can do, to the integration of knowledge, comprehension, and refinement of application. And that's where we're going to participate more. We're going to become more knowledge workers. Now, that applies in our industry, right? Our work, but it also applies in education as well. I'm participating in a lot of discussions in academy, in academics, where they're having to rethink. Especially, well, think about what we're going through right now. All of a sudden, you don't centralize your education. My son has, what, 3 semesters left for his degree, and he's
Mhm.
probably not going to step on the campus for the next 2 semesters. My his fiance um, defended her thesis, and worked with her thesis advisor over the last 3 weeks, and that was all done out of my study here in the other
Mhm.
part of the house. And this is the way it is. It's not a place you go. It's not a library. It's wherever you are. We're focusing more on not a physical location or a tool like a book. We're going to have knowledge itself that we are managing and manipulating. And that's where it gets really cool. And we're not just talking to professors and advisors. We're talking to researchers. We're talking to people in business, and it's more of a collaborative approach. And that's the direction I see it going. It's more integrated in, and it's lifelong. And that's something else that Drucker said. We have to plan for the second half of our lives. We have to plan, or we're not going to get what we want. There's no more gold watch. There's no more retirement package. There's no more health care when you retire. We can't really rely on that. We have to plan. We have to consciously do that. And that has to be part of our education. We have to be strategic, just like corporations are. The organizations, how long do they last? 3 or 5 years inside of a company? Corporations, they used to last for centuries. And now corporations, how long do they last? As long as necessary to be gone. And people's lives can last up to a century. So we have to do something about this. We have to take our own destiny into our hands, and we have to do it as individuals and as communities. If we work together on this, I think we can do some really interesting things. We're talking about this in professional communities. We're talking about this in religious communities. Now we have to talk about this in education communities. And we're gathering it with as like-minded individuals participating in this grand experience. That's how
Let
I
me
see
pick
it.
your, yeah, absolutely. Let me pick your words. Let me quote your words, in fact. You said automation versus acquisition of education. Do you see this two doesn't go along well together?
I think, see, this is what the internet did for
Mhm.
education, and I saw it in my children's generation. Learning is no longer reading something in a book. Learning is pulling up 500 references on a computer that are 500 different books and synthesizing that into knowledge. And so all of a sudden, the skills you need are not reading and recognition and comprehension. It's integration. It's innovation. It's creating new knowledge. And so I'm seeing with my own eyes, and I'm learning this with the people, the younger generations who are going through my class. It's not necessarily the facts and figures that they're collecting. It's how they put them together that I'm actually coaching and mentoring them on. It's how they use them effectively. So as
But do you see,
go ahead.
sorry, Tim, do you see it as a threat, the automation part?
It depends. If you see success for your career as a skill, automation is a threat. If you see success as having a specific set of knowledge, it's a threat. If you see
Mhm.
your success and your progress as innovation and as integration and application of new knowledge, this is a remarkable opportunity. That's how I see it. It really depends on how you approach this. And I'm on the Drucker camp. If you plan, if you see the direction we're going with automation, we're
Mhm.
going to automate all of these skills. And we see this in project management. We see this in all industries. Automation is taking away the skills job. It's the knowledge working stuff. It's the integration and creating new ideas, and the application of new ideas is where is if we focus on that, it's remarkable opportunities. So this whole learning how to learn, all of a sudden it's not taught to kindergarten through sixth grade. It's like conscious. It's like quality, right? And quality is, you think it's quality. Okay, we put quality into our manufacturing. We don't have to think about it. No, quality is a constant topic, and learning how to learn is going to be a constant topic. It's basically going to be one of these things like quality and risk and everything else that business is going to have to demand and refine and further influence on. Yep.
Certainly, Tim. In coming weeks, I would request you to plan a session specifically for the topic "Learn How to Learn." I see a lot of need of this topic to be discussed. So let's do it on some Monday. But before we end this today's session, we talked about education. Let me ask you this: uh, who is your mentor? Who is your best mentor?
So I have two or three project management mentors that I've had for a couple decades. I have 7,000 students who have taught me how to teach and understand the comprehension of project management. And I have about 30 authors. Everybody I meet teaches me something. Everyone I meet teaches me something. And I approach my life in that model. And if I approach my life in that model, I will continue to learn in progress. But right now, due to my research and due to the topics that I'm thinking about, I have about 3,000 years of documented thoughts and ideas and analysis that I study, from philosophy through math, through the sciences, through education itself. Everything is my mentor. Everything. You're my mentor.
Thank you, Tim, for this. Yeah, it's an ongoing uh, journey, I believe so. Let's continue our discussion next Monday as well on this. I would like you to discuss also on learn how to learn, give your thoughts and what's actually running in your mind. I know you have actually planned the entire program uh, for people to be taught on how to learn. I mean, that's a specific and a very critical skills. One of the skills that people should actually acquire. And I would like you to give some more thoughts on this, if possibly in our next session.
How to stay relevant in the 21st century. How can I predict that I'm going to have a job in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? This is what I'm trying to give the people who come to me for education, and I'd like to share that with a broader audience. You're helping me with my mission, Kumar, and I'd be more than happy to.
No, same do. I have the same similar feeling, Tim. People, we are trying to improve this session more, try to make it more meaningful to you. Please do leave your comments, leave your feedback on the comment section. Let us know what all topics you would like to discuss, and is there any point that you want to have a talk with Tim? Please do let me know, and we can have that session as well. So please send your feedbacks in terms of making this sessions and other sessions more meaningful to you. With this, I thank you, Tim, for joining in today's session. I know you have a busy day. I see sun coming from straight from your window, so you can enjoy the rest of the day ahead. And I wish that you see some rain today.
Oh, I will enjoy myself. Enjoy your evening as well, Kumar, and thanks everybody. I really appreciate your participation, your curiosity, and again, I echo Kumar's request. If you have any thoughts, if you have any concerns, I learn from you. We learn from you, and we're actually looking for meeting your needs as well as discussing what we think is important today. Thanks again,
Perfect.
Kumar.
Thank you, everybody who has joined in. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day and the evening, and we'll talk again on coming Monday. Till then, thank you so much and take care. Bye bye.
Thanks.